What's up, Betters? Have an awesome video for y'all today. My guest is Steve Bassett. He is one of the very first people to register as a UFO lobbyist in D.C. in the 90s. And now he's the head of the Paradigm Research Group, which is a lobbying effort based out of Washington, D.C. to bring UFO disclosure to the public, right? And he's been fighting ever since the 90s. So we brought him on the show to talk about UFO disclosure. Here's some highlights from our interview.
The U.S. government has gone to enormous lengths to ensure that a straightforward common sense analysis of what's happened doesn't take place. The government would be happy for us to debate this issue until the end of time. We are not alone. We have non-humans here. They almost certainly come from other stars. And and a huge amount of information about that is sequestered behind that embargo, and we want all of that information given to us. You shift to another approach, maybe another issue altogether, and you conduct science and you have a meaningful life. But what if the government is deliberately screwing with the subject matter? There's non-human tech and non-human bodies, and he has had firsthand testimony from those involved. And so what? That's just going to hang there? Well, eventually, that's going to become a real problem. Witness protection was being put into some of this legislation, which meant more witnesses are coming forward, ultimately leading to, in a complicated way, the coming forward of David Grush, which was a very powerful event, which opened up more things, and things are just advancing very quickly.
If you're new to the channel, y'all, and you like content like this, please hit that subscribe button. I put out a new video every day, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. I do not miss a day, y'all. And please hit that like button, Vetters. That really helps out the videos. So thank y'all so much for the support there. And of course, comment down below. What do you think about our comments concerning UFO disclosure? There's a lot to discuss there. Let's go, y'all. Enjoy the interview. Look, maybe a little bit of background on you for our viewers. You can expand, but I know you're one of the very first, if not only, UFO lobbyists?
The first to register, and for most of the last 28 years, the only, but in the last few years, a number of new registrations have taken place on this subject with the Senate office, and that's wonderful.
But you started it. You started this, right?
Well, I did it. I didn't start the political engagement of the issue, but
Sure.
I planted a flag deliberately by registering because we should have a lobbyist, even though there was no chance of being paid anything. I also started a political action committee to show that flag. It was not much I could do with it in order to really do something as a political, action committee. You need funding. And again, getting funding back in the 90s for this issue on the politics of it was not good. So it's okay. These kinds of things are important. Eventually, you stick around long enough, and more political action committees turned up. One just was formed, a significant one called the UAP Disclosure Fund, 501c34. So it only took 26 years, but yeah, it's happening now.
That's awesome. That's all. What did you call it? The UAP Disclosure Fund? Is that the Matt Ford and Lou Elizondo, Gary Nolan one? Am I getting that right?
Well, I think Gary's involved in both. Gary also started the Soul Foundation, and I think he may be involved. There's an Asian gentleman that's, I think, the head of the UAP Disclosure Fund, but I think some of these gentlemen are involved. It's, again, this is essentially a post-disclosure targeting political action entity, and then Soul is a post-disclosure targeting scientific entity. But again, we haven't had disclosure yet, so the work that they're doing now will probably help a little bit towards finally getting across that line.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I don't know if I've heard it described that way. So post-disclosure. So this is the intention for these action committees, is the work that they're doing is based on the idea that we've found out publicly.
Oh, yeah.
There's been a disclosure. Now, how do we deal with it, right? Which I agree. Those things should be set up ahead of time, which would then infer there is disclosure coming.
Yes.
Right? Is that what you're inferring?
Oh, yes.
So, okay, that's interesting. So is there like a plan set in place? Like officially or unofficially, or how does that work?
Set in place by whom?
I don't know. I'm asking you. I don't know. You're saying there's a plan in place, or I guess the question would be, how do you know disclosure is coming?
Well, that's based upon being aware of and knowledgeable about the entire history of the issue and all the developments, most of certainly the political developments in the last years, certainly the last 7. If someone is familiar with all of that, it's obvious. If someone is not, it's not obvious. That's true of all things. And as someone that is completely devoted to this, that's all I do. I can say with complete confidence, 100%, no doubt, confidence, that disclosure is coming. And I use that 100% because that is the number that was used by Gary Nolan at the SALT conference a year ago when asked if there is a presence here. And no doubt is the phrase used by Colonel
Carl Nell.
Carl Nell when he was asked if we have this presence here. So all I can, and obviously both of these gentlemen have been paying close attention to this. So all I can say to the public is for those that are paying close attention, the ET presence is absolutely proven beyond any reasonable doubt. I say ET presence, I'm referring to non-humans,
Sure.
and I am implying that I am one who supports the star-to-star basis for that. Is that certain? No, but believe me, you don't want to put your money on any of the other options. Those people like to do that. They go to Vegas and bet on the most least likely things to make them any money. And the idea that disclosure is inevitable is also a certainty as well. For those that are not intimately involved with this or understand it, it still remains heavily in doubt. I respect that.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Okay. Well, I have a lot of questions actually. Okay, so you say for someone that's been in this a long time, the fact that disclosure is coming is quite obvious. And then you also say, well, you're quoting Gary Nolan and Carl Nell, which I saw those presentations. They were fantastic. So Gary Nolan says 100% certain that ET presence is not just like, yeah, we're not alone, but that on Earth, right? Because those are two distinctions, right? That we're not alone and they visited. So you're saying, right, they're referring to 100%. We have been visited on this Earth. Both of them saying, right, zero doubt. And you agree with that.
Do you believe that extraterrestrial intelligence has visited planet Earth?
I think you can go a step further. It hasn't just visited, it's been here a long time and it's still here. And it has basically, people talk about the wow signal, looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. The wow signal is that people see it on an almost regular basis. That's the communication that's already here.
And that statement seems so incredible that it's tough to believe, right? Like, people hear that, and maybe a lot of people here hear that, and they don't believe it. And so I'm curious, if you had to assign a probability to that statement, that you believe extraterrestrial intelligence has visited this planet, what probability would you assign?
100%.
And so, Carl, here's the million-dollar question. Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
And so, Carl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
Look, I get the idea that, okay, so-and-so has credibility and they're saying these things. But on one hand, I've heard a lot of people say this is the greatest, discovery of mankind, the greatest knowledge we could ever have. It is just the word of some people, even if it's 1,000 people, the word good enough to just be like, yep, that's real. What evidence, like physical evidence that can be passed around to other people is out there that, does that make sense what I'm getting at, I guess?
Yeah, I understand. This kind of thinking, of course, is generated by the government. They want us to be in that state all the time, never step out of it. The U.S. government has gone to enormous lengths to ensure that a straightforward common sense analysis of what's happened doesn't take place, that it's not engaged by the standard modalities at the proper level that would obviously make it even clearer to the general public that it's true. I call that the truth embargo. That's a term that I came up with in the early aughts. And the effort to end that truth embargo, which is a political effort because that was a political decision. I called the disclosure with a capital D. Disclosure, the term in general, it had been in play without question, but I put a capital D on it and said, look, this is the goal of this activist movement. And the goal is the president of the United States or another head of state has got to come forward and end this embargo and say, look, it's real here. And you probably want to know more about this, and we're going to do our best to tell you. And so underneath that statement, that I think a significant number of people don't fully understand or grasp, but though even people that I'm pretty sure that this phenomenon is real and probably and non-human, but they don't have a full grasp of the full mass of evidence that has been put together, the research that has been done, not by the esteemed scientists and political scientists of our esteemed universities and colleges, and not gathered by enormous, well-funded investigative journalism by our esteemed and highest level journalistic entities, not by them at all, by by citizens, not just of this country, but other countries, working under the umbrella of the stigma that the government attached to this issue with in any way they could, spending their own money, spending their own lives, amassing a huge volume of evidence, which includes tens upon tens of thousands of investigated cases, thousands of documents, thousands of personal testimonies put into journals, right? Compounded on websites, videos, photos, and on and on and on. The evidence for the presence of non-humans on this planet is absolutely overwhelming. But the US government looks you in the eye and says there is nothing there. And that, of course, is a problem, not simply because it undermines the ability for people to engage this issue in a proper way, but it undermines the trust that we have in our own government. Because when somebody lies to you that bald face in your personal life, generally your reaction is, I don't want to deal with this person anymore. I don't want this person in my life. I don't want to do business with them. I don't want to marry them. If they can lie that blatantly, and worse, maybe repeatedly, you get out of their life. Well, when you're talking about your government doing it, getting out of the government's life means immigrating to another country. So that's how I try to couch this. The problem is not if their evidence. The problem is the government refuses to acknowledge that evidence, and the government has a lot of influence and power and resources, and that's what the activist movement is up against.
What do you think is? I mean, okay, I guess this is a better way to put this. Jim Semivan was recently on a podcast. I made a video about it today, and he basically described the basic UFO story, right? That I think just most people would want to know. And he just described, we're not alone in the universe. We have non-human craft. We have met with the aliens, and we have an agreement with the aliens, right? And he's basically saying, and he said a couple other things about defense contracts or whatever, but basically that's the gist of the UFO story. Do you believe that?
Well, there's a lot to the UFO story.
Sure, but I mean, just the basic. Yeah, I think those are the points people really want to know, right? If that's true, do we have craft? We have bodies, and we've met with the aliens. This agreement that's the thread I really want to pull.
Obviously, that's pretty provocative.
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Semivan, who I have great respect for, who spent his whole life working for the CIA, but is also a contactee, and came out with the Magnificent 10, I like to call them, in 2007 as part of this organization that was designed literally to be able to come out so they could go public and engage this issue. in the form of a company that could make money and do research and what have you, which is perfectly fine because none of these
Sure.
people are going to improve their financial prospects by attaching themselves to this issue. He'd make that statement. He's not the only one that has.
Correct.
I am not there yet. The evidence for a ET presence or a non-human presence and non-human tech is massively overwhelming. The evidence for direct formal engagement with ETs and treaties is anything but overwhelming. It is very small. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I'm not there yet,
Yeah.
but the fact that he says that should
It's
garner
interesting.
our attention.
Sure. Sure.
And
Yeah, I get it.
you can be sure that if we do get a formal confirmation from the President of the United States, one of the very early questions that the media is going to ask, and they're going to be unleashed, they'll be probably asking anything. There's not going to be anything holding them back. Like, well,
Yeah.
let's don't ask that yet. Let's wait a year. No, they're going to ask every tough question in the first 20 minutes if they can get their attention of the podium. People are going to ask, do you have a formal relationship with with ETs? Any ETs? Is there a treaty? And I can assure you, if the answer is yes, that is right up near the top of the list of really difficult, uneasy questions that the government's going to have to ask, and a huge public relations problem for the government. One of many. And one of the reasons why, no matter how appropriate disclosure has become, how needed it has become, there are plenty of people in government that just don't want to face that music. They would prefer to be retired and or dead. And so in that sense, many have held back and supported this truth embargo simply because they don't want to face the American people. And unfortunately, that's just not acceptable. All I can say
Yeah.
is you don't want to do that, quit. Please retire, go away, find a job, open some chicken franchises, do anything, but do not take our taxpayers' money to serve us. Right?
Yeah.
Right? Get it?
Yeah.
That's my view on it. It's a little harsh, but
Yeah.
that's how I feel.
No. No, I like your no nonsense approach. I've really enjoyed watching your interviews, to be honest with you, because of that. And that made me really want to talk to you, if I'm being honest. I was like, okay, I like this guy. This is how I talk. I like talking like this. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your honesty about this because, I think a lot of people in this community, I'm new to it. So a lot of people in this community been in it a long time, and rightfully so. I come from the world of restaurants. So I had that after being in it a long time too, a lot of assumptions about things. Just
Mhm.
I know these things to be true, and I'm over here talking about this now, right? Where there's a lot of us coming in going, well, wait a second, we're past first base and second base and third and on our way to home. What evidence have people seen that made them go, yeah, this is real? Because for me, I don't want to just cross that finish line and go, it's the phenomenon is, I'm a non-experiencer, so that's why I say that. For me, I either need an experience or actual evidence, something that would blow anything away, right? I love stories, they're great, but again, if it's the greatest knowledge in mankind, I don't want to cross that finish line prematurely. So, is it just that you do it so long that eventually you're just like, man, I've just heard so much from so many people, so many stories. It has to be true? Or what evidence actually have you seen, Steve, that like just blew your mind
Well,
about this? It was a smoking gun.
again, it's not about having your mind blown. I studied science. I have a degree in physics. I didn't use it, but I got a degree in physics. So you walk into the classroom and you sit down, and the professor or the teacher start to explain you certain principles about physics, about the scientific laws of the universe. Uh, they're not there to prove it, right? You don't walk in, sit down in the classroom, and say, "All right, prove to me." Here's what we know. Okay, here's what we know, and you learn. Okay, you don't go in and say, "Look, first, before I even participate in this class or getting this degree in physics, you've got to prove to me all of the fundamental principles of science and everything. You got to prove it all to me, and then if I'm convinced, I will sit down and you can explain it to me." That's
Sure.
not the way life works. It's not the way science is done. It's not the way truth is arrived at. All right. The scientific method is applicable even to the affairs of humans to some degree. The scientific method is probably the most significant achievement of the human race, which is possible because our brains developed rather nicely and became quite sophisticated. Not that I have anything against chimpanzees or whatever, some of our fellow species there, but they don't conduct the scientific method. The scientific method was a way to learn, establish, prove, so you could go on to learn more, or you could build an understanding, a knowledge base about the world. Without it, everybody's born into the world and they don't know what the hell's going on, and they just have to make their way and do the best they can, right? Because nothing's been proven. Nobody knows what's going on, and so forth. So anyway, the scientific method establishes this. It involves peer review. It involves certain processes of research, the ability to replicate, and all of that. Though the scientific method doesn't necessarily apply to every aspect of the physical world in quite the same way, right? We have significantly understood aspects of the small world that we cannot see at all, right? So, but the scientific method has helped establish a level of knowledge and understanding and a level of certainty that allows us to build rockets and precisely launch them and go to the moon. And I assure you, you can't do that based on opinion. You like take a poll of a bunch of guys and say, or men and women, and say, look, how do you think we should go to the moon? Right? Well, I don't know. We could do this. We could do that. And you say, well, let's just try this. Let's try. No. You can't do that. There is a proof. There's a level of proof and certainty involved in the scientific method that has made our civilization possible, but also created some of the greatest risks that we have to our life and even to the planet itself. Yeah. Well, this is true about non-scientific areas as well. So, when you're looking at civilization itself, the totality of it, what is true and what is false, is also important. If somebody gets assassinated and you don't know why, or you're given a false reason for it, then that affects how you think about the circumstances of your time, the government, and so forth. It affects your worldview, and it can affect not the worldview of you, but the effect of the millions of people, and therefore can affect the way that the society is conducting its affairs and so forth. In other words, it seems obvious, but a healthy, functioning society, it needs to be built on truth. The ones that are built on lies don't last long. They end badly. I mean, we know this. We've seen it happen over and over and over again. All right, just like marriages, right? There are some people that think, hey, the way to have a good marriage is like both spouses just lie to each other constantly. So they're always misrepresenting, but to their own effect, and they just kind of build this completely false thing that it makes their marriage better. No, it doesn't. Okay, it literally destroys it. And so the truth matters in non-scientific areas in that sense. And so how do you establish the truth in those areas that are outside of what we call the scientific method? It's harder. It is much harder. And yet it can be done. Now, the matter of an extraterrestrial presence is in fact involve a lot of science. Okay. Some of it does not. All right, there's some aspects of it that it's hard to take a scientific approach to it, but a lot of it is in fact science. Study of sightings, trace cases, right? And in the area of psychology, the study of how people are being affected by something. All right. So the scientific method has been conducted by citizens, some of which had degrees relevant to the particular area they're investigating, most of which did not. And in the case where someone had the appropriate training and education degrees and what have you, in that area, in that instance, their work was more of a threat to the truth embargo. And in that instance, the government would definitely push back. In other words, if you're just a regular person without all those credentials and you're just doing studies, and you're doing fine studies, and maybe you're putting reports with MUFON or sending them to Newfork and what have you. That's fine, but you don't have that gravitas. You don't have those credentials, so you're not much of a threat. But boy, if you've got them, then you have a problem, and that's when the government pushes back. So if you're James McDonald, a top atmospheric physicist and a fine scientist, and you're engaging this issue in a very sophisticated way, all right, and you're coming up with results that you were then presenting to meeting after meeting of other scientists and engineers, the IEEE, which he was doing back in the 60s. You're a threat because you're the real deal. It's a little harder to say, well, this person is nuts, or this person doesn't have the training. And so they basically destroyed him. If you're Alan Hynek, they lied to you. If you're Dr. John Mack, they try to run you out of Harvard. Now, that is the problem. Not how much proof do we have. We got a lot of it. And some of it was put together by people with all the credentials that you would expect to have, the kind of people that have credentials to, how would you say, come up with provable theories about quantum physics that the government doesn't interfere with. The government doesn't say, look, this quantum theory is just too dangerous to the being able to manage our society and govern. And so we've got to undermine the quantum physics scientists, right? We got to tell people they're crazy, they're nuts, whatever, or, run them out of school, take away their tenure. No, they don't do that. It's not a political thing, quantum physics. But the presence of ETs and ET science is. And so they try to destroy that. And so I'm not sympathetic. And I'm not trying to be. I'm not pointing at you in any way. I'm simply saying I'm not sympathetic.
You can. It's okay. I can handle it.
For the arguments about where's the proof, and why should we listen to this person who doesn't have a degree in science or whatever, and so forth. I'm not sympathetic because the citizens, because of the issue is so important, and the citizens really have dedicated themselves. People without scientific degrees. There are many who have done far more about really understanding this issue than 100 other academics that could have engaged it and didn't. And so I respect the citizen science effort. Is it messy? Sure, of course it is. Sure. If the citizens have to look, there was a time when science itself was advanced by kind of just citizens, right? They didn't have these formal colleges so much. And the understanding was, by people that were almost self-taught, and it was tough, right? And so we didn't advance as well. But then when we started to really create a sophisticated effort to understand the world, we started making great progress. And in the sense of understanding human societies and history, when we have gone about it in a sophisticated way, we've made progress. But in a couple of instances, notable, governments have stepped in and said, no, we're not going to learn that. We're not going to study that. We're going to undermine that. Because it serves the state. The Nazis did it. The Soviets did it. And the U.S. has done it. Different reasons, different places, different subjects. And this has caused enormous grief and loss to the human society. It's created enormous grievance and injustices. Because when you deny the truth, when you undermine the truth tellers, you're not making things better. You're making them worse. And the truth embargo is 77 years on. And I can tell you without any doubt, it has made the 20th century worse and opened up doors for more bad things to happen and exacerbated other issues. And once they got good at that, same thing with the Soviets, the same thing with the Nazis. Once they got good, it's sort of obfuscating reality. And once they got success with their propaganda, in a particular area, they said, if we can do it here, we can do it there. And they started just spreading, getting a larger spectrum of unreality, which then was reacted to by some very fine authors like Orwell and others who are saying, look, we're turning into a world where propaganda is a fundamental aspects of civilization, and propaganda is going to lead us to hell. And so they're writing these books about how that's going to go. Well, it's still going that way. All right. And so the idea of proof and evidence, all this stuff, I had to move past that, right? In other words, at some point, you have to say the government is the problem. The government is the liar. The government is preventing confirmation, but it's not eradicating the truth, and therefore you got to deal with the government on this. The government would be happy for us to debate this issue until the end of time, to debate the fundamentals, the truth, to question each other, to undermine each other, right? Like, you said this and you said that. How do you know that? Do you have a degree? Do you have this? Whatever. They'd love us to do that forever, but we're not going to do that. We're going to cut through that, and we're going to go right to the fundamental problem. And that is this: the US government has deliberately denied the truth in this issue for 77 years minimum. And until the government ends that embargo, we cannot make proper progress. We cannot engage this issue appropriately, and we can't deal with it as a civilization. It is a political problem, and it's not a science problem. And for those that don't understand this issue, don't understand the history, I understand why they're going, well, wait a minute, don't we need to get this proof together? Not even knowing that the proof is together, right? I understand that. The governments succeed very well when they play this game. We are seeing over and over in the modern world, particularly since the rise of mass global communication, social media, and everything else attached to it, that the ability to put out massive amounts of nonsense and gather a lot of support for it is a part of our new world. And we are not dealing with it well. Hopefully we will start to adjust to that. So the truth is not getting easier to establish and maintain. It's getting harder. Not in the area of hard physics. We're still able to pretty much stay there, unless you're talking about the physics of ET craft and so forth. But in terms of other areas, propaganda is becoming an almost ingrained aspect of the human condition. It used to be like it was a side thing. Like everybody understood that during World War II, there was propaganda going on, and some of it was obvious and almost laughable, like Tokyo Rose. And they understood that that could happen, and you don't listen to that. Okay, you listen to the government. The government's telling you the truth. And the other government that you're opposing, they're lying. We got that. And then what we didn't understand is over the next 70 years, propaganda would become an absolute institutionalized aspect of human societies. Not just in the idea of, well, one country is fighting another, therefore you got to lie and they got to lie and in order to support their war effort, but literally as a fundamental aspect of our condition. And that is not working out well. But I can't deal with that. The totality of this problem is beyond me. All I can do is focus with one fundamental lie, right? And the political embargo of that lie. And that is, we are not alone. We have non-humans here. They almost certainly come from other stars. And and a huge amount of information about that is sequestered behind that embargo. And we want all of that information given to us.
Yeah. Okay. Well said. I definitely have quite a few questions. I didn't want to interrupt you.
It's all right. I appreciate you didn't. Thank you.
Of course. Well, we'll be able you to get your thoughts out. During the time of, I believe, it was during the Civil War, during that time, during the 1800s, the idea of slavery during that time was very, people were like, yeah, that sounds bad. Okay, this, that, the other. But what really changed, what really moved the needle, amongst many things, was a photograph that circulated of a man who had been whipped on the back, and it was horrific. Sure. And they took this portrait, it got shared, and people got to see viscerally, oh, I've heard the stories. I've heard all the stories. Yeah. I've seen people, met people, but this really, holy crap, this is crazy. And that really started a movement.
Well, it was a factor, but I mean, believe me, the abolition movement was a long-standing and developing and mature. It's a highlight. It's called a truth nugget. But good point. In order for slavery to be maintained, a hell of a lot of propaganda had to be generated, misrepresenting what it was like to be a slave in the South, so that the people who were not did not have slaves, or were in the North, which is simplifying it, but would be willing to, in other words, to prevent the abolitionist movement from gaining too much strength, you have to put out propaganda, right? And lie about the circumstances. And that propaganda had to be pierced eventually so that enough support for dealing with the slavery issue. Now, it ultimately did not go well, right? Uh, Overcoming that propaganda ended up being a war that killed huge numbers of people. The question that is in front of us today is, will the propaganda that is helping to support the mutual assured destruction situation we're in and the nuclear arms race end badly? Will the propaganda and the lies that are preventing us from knowing the reality of our presence in this world, meaning the presence of non-human technology and non-humans, is that going to end badly? It can. It can definitely end badly. Okay? And this time it won't just be a civil war, which was bad. It'll be 1,000 civil wars.
Well, let me just finish the point I was going to make when I was talking about that. So okay, so they show this picture, and but the point is that I was trying to make is that they needed to actually see something. The stories weren't enough. This wasn't enough. The actual seeing it really made the difference. And then you fast forward to World War II, and after the Nazis lost power and they were defeated, there were trials for a lot of these people who were involved in this. And again, what made a difference in these trials were these old film reels that they were showing during the trial,
Sure.
viscerally showing exactly what happened at these concentration camps, because people could talk about it one way and you get perspectives and this and that, and the guards saying, well, it wasn't that bad, and the people in there going, no, it's pretty bad, right? And so then you go, well, let's just see the video, right? So they show the video, boom, that makes a huge difference.
Will at this time present to the tribunal, with its permission, a documentary film on concentration camps. This is by no means the entire proof which the prosecution will offer with respect to the subject of concentration camps. But this film, which we offer, represents in a brief and unforgettable form an explanation of what the words concentration camp imply.
If the tribunal please, we shall proceed with the projection of the film.
And I think, and these are just two examples off the top of my head, but I think that's why, to push back on something you said, quite a bit ago, but I do have sympathy for people who still want to see actual real evidence of this stuff, physical stuff that, again, I can share that evidence with someone else and they can experience like I do. A story of that, there
Sure.
could be stuff that's very sort of ambiguous. And I think you want that too. And I just think I don't ever want to lose sight of that. Actually, I think actually the propaganda would be to make you forget about the evidence and start listening to people and their stories. Because I think if we go down that line, then it becomes a matter of, well, who's more credible? Who do I believe more? And I get there's other, radar data and there's witnesses and that all means a lot. And that means for me, I want to vote for tax dollars to be spent on this to investigate, right? I'm not against that fight. I believe in what you're saying too, going after the government. They're hiding something. What is it? Let's pass legislation. And that's why I appreciate efforts like yours, Danny Sheehan, even other people who are really pushing the government for, disclosure, the truth, as you're saying. But I personally, and I think I can't imagine any, a lot of people would disagree. Maybe they would, but, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, eventually I do need to see something to take me to the next level.
Well,
that's
you will.
pretty
You'll see it after we get disclosure. The whole
Stuff will
world
come
is
out.
going to see a lot of things. However,
Yeah.
understand this: we have tons of footage, we have photos, we have videos. So imagine the trials, the Nuremberg trials, and so you got the Germans sitting there in the dock, and as part of the trials, I think this happened. They brought out footage of the concentration camps, And the defense
That's what I'm
attorney
talking
stood
about.
up and said, that's all fake.
Yeah.
The government faked the whole thing. Crisis actors, whatever. It's not real.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And now the government's got to prove it. Well, let's get the photographer in. Did you take this photo? Did you take this video? Yes, I did. Well, he's lying. You know, the rubric that came up a lot over the last 70 years is that if a photo is not crystal clear, which would be substantial, though any photo can be faked, but if it's not crystal clear,
But
then
there's a
it
difference between those,
well,
because
again, very strong.
one is proving something that you can prove every bit of that story at some point is provable, whereas the UFO, you're trying to prove two things: that the thing in it is non-human and there's no other reference for that, and this is a real picture of a non-human. Does that make sense? You're trying to prove these two different things as opposed to the other.
Again, no single thing proves anything.
I agree
It,
with that.
it's
I
the
agree with you
it's the
there.
massive spectrum of evidence.
I agree with that
Essentially,
too. In
okay.
the context of things, I'm with you. I
But I'm
understand.
making a point here that anything that turned up that was crystal clear had to be fake, and anything that was not, it was kind of fuzzy or whatever, it wasn't good, then it's not relevant. So there
Sure.
was no way any of that
Yeah.
evidence could work, right?
Sure.
And let's also be clear. We're not dealing we're dealing with a rather special circumstance.
I agree.
We're not proving what the Nazis did in World War II. We're trying to understand what star to star faring high technology non-humans are up to, and they're not giving seminars. They don't
Yeah.
have podcasts. They don't come down and give lectures. They're not teaching
Yeah.
at the universities. They have
Yeah.
the ability to cloak, to come and go, to do anything they want, any way they want. And so we're faced with that very significant problem. Now, as it
Yeah.
happens, the government has the resources, the technology to track, to note, to film with gun cameras on their intercept planes, and actually pretty much accumulate a substantial evidentiary base. But the citizens don't. I don't have
Yeah.
F-17s at my disposal. I don't have anything at my disposal really, and so this is a special case. And
Sure.
I assure you, because virtually only governments have the ability to truly get the goods on this ET presence in a way that would satisfy most people. If the governments decide, no, we're not going to acknowledge that, we're not going to convey that information, we are going to classify it, we're going to study it in the deepest classified underground facilities if necessary. This is
Yeah.
not typical. This is special. That's why this truth embargo is 77 years on. This is an extraordinary situation. Nothing in the history of the human race is comparable. Now, in ancient times,
I
which
agree.
I happen to believe the ETs did hang out, it was a little different matter. Okay, it was less of an issue if ancient humans in long ago civilizations were aware that there was these entities hanging around. Generally, they just immediately worshiped them as gods, and that's so. And there was influence going on. And I believe that in the post-disclosure world, we will learn more about that, and we will discover that a number of the episodes of Ancient Aliens, right on, right? A lot of them
That's
no, but right
interesting.
on.
That's
But again,
interesting.
that's not where we are now.
Sure.
The 20th
When
century.
do you think that changed? What point changed where they pulled back?
I love that question. No, what point changed when they elevated their engagement to in the
Yeah.
modern world? Okay,
Yeah.
in other words,
Oh,
obviously, based on some of the what we think was happening in the ancient world, if that were happening now, obviously this would be a different situation. Okay,
yeah.
but that's not what's happening. So what is happening? And I've talked about this. Um, in if you as you go back in time, so the first half of the 20th century, the 19th century, the 18th century, there's just not, I believe, a lot of activity. Uh, Admittedly, we didn't have the ability in the 1700s, 1800s, and so forth to record and account for
Sure.
what was happening. But the sense I have, and I feel confident about it, is that the level of activity just wasn't that great. Now we know that there are some paintings and so forth that go back many hundreds of years that seem to point to this event and that event and so forth. But I believe that nothing in the relatively modern times, I'm not talking about 3,000 years ago, compares to the last 77 years. The level of activity just exploded. Why? Well, I have my theory about that, and others have their theory. But as I've said many times, I believe the modern era of the UAP ET engagement of this modern spacefaring eventually spacefaring technological civilization gets underway in a kind of, if you want to give it a beginning, a start, when the gun goes off.
Yeah.
Is when the first bomb is dropped out of the Enola Gay and explodes a few hundred feet over the city of Hiroshima and immediately obliterates thousands and thousands of people, most of which were women, children, and non-combatant men. Ultimately, with Nagasaki and the total aftermath, a couple of 100,000 people died, which is not a huge number. We've done better than that, but nevertheless, the annihilation of humans with nuclear weapons by other humans in 1945, I think, is what triggered a new engagement of our civilization by these ETs, which is to say, by inference, that if we had not dropped those bombs, or if we had dropped them off the coast in order to make a point that you need to surrender. And it's worth noting that Japan was cooked. It was done. There was no question that they were going to lose the war. The Russians were about to invade from the north. They had no chance, but they were stubborn. I get that. But ultimately, the excuse was, if we don't drop these bombs, we have to invade Japan directly. That is questionable. Truman was also told that we're not going to be able to have any more bombs, or we don't have any, or whatever, our ability to create more, and that's going to be a problem. That was a lie. But whatever, he was convinced, let's do it. Let's drop them on the cities. And that was a hallmark, an absolute hallmark in the history of the human race. We have been killing each other forever. We're good at it. We constantly improve our ability to do it. But when we got to the nuclear weapon, we got to a certain point, just one notch below the ultimate weapon, which is antimatter weapons. And we said, no, that's what we do. We got a new weapon. It's very powerful. We got another conflict going. Got to use it. And we did. And right away, stuff started happening. And the ESTs started increasing their engagement. The number of sightings and so forth and reports started slowly escalating through 1946 into 47. Sightings over nuclear facilities or new base. Well, I say nuclear facilities. Obviously, Roswell was essentially a nuclear facility. So was Los Alamos. So there was some connection there, something evolving using of that bomb. The reality of that bomb had triggered something. And when I entered the field in 1996, I had a sense of it, but not a strong sense of it. But 28 years later, after everything that I have seen and heard and know, and I don't know everything, but I know a little bit about everything, right? But I don't know everything about everything. I'm more convinced than ever that the connection between the ET activities in the last 77 years and the nukes is absolutely essential. Yeah. That's what's going on here.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's a lot of focus on that, and I'm putting a lot of emphasis on that, and others are as well.
Yeah, I've heard it.
And the single most important event in my list of things that ETs have done, or we know about ETs, is that they have turned off the nuclear weapons a number of times in the United States and the Soviet Union. Nothing is more significant than that.
I agree with you. Honestly, I do agree with that. There should be way more focus on that. How did that happen? What's going on? What are we doing about that? I agree with you. Look, you keep mentioning a phrase that I did, I want to get to, but I was kind of waiting because I find it fascinating because a lot of people aren't saying this, but you are, which is this star to star
Yeah.
theory, right? So you're, let me steelman this back to you, and then you tell me if I'm, what I'm wrong about here. Are you saying that you believe the non-human intelligence is coming from another star system, literally extraterrestrial, not interdimensional or extratemporal or
Right.
any of this, spirits, demons, any of that? It's coming from another planet. They got in spaceships and figured out a way to get here, and they got here, right? Is that it? Okay. Yeah. No, I like this theory. Why don't more people talk about this? Like, where is this interdimensional, all this other stuff coming from then?
Essentially, it's a result of the truth embargo. Uh, because the government obviously has embargoed this issue and prevented the proper analysis and development in the public sector, so that we have a defined process of truth and understanding on it. It just opens. It's like a truth vacuum. It just opens the door to all kinds of things,
No, that's
and
true.
that's true in
That's true.
science. In other words,
Yeah.
before we nail down a particular scientific process or truth or
Sure. There's a lot
understanding,
out there.
up until then, there's lots of speculation. It could be this, it could be
Sure.
that, and the whole purpose of
Sure.
the scientific method is to eliminate all of the speculations that are false and get to
Correct.
the one that is the truth. Now, since
Correct.
the government denies this truth and embargoes it, it just kept the speculation door open this whole time, 77 years, right? And so naturally, all kinds of theories have emerged here, there, and whatever, and they're not going to be run to ground because there's only so much money the citizens have to invest in this. And the big shot monies
Well,
wouldn't do it until recently. Universities wouldn't do it. So this speculation has been a huge part of the truth embargo. In other words, to the extent that everybody's speculating, they're not challenging the truth embargo, right? You can
sure.
have all the theories you want. You can debate them. You can argue whatever. But as long as you're not coming at the government going, "We want to know what you have," the government's fine with that. They love it,
I
and
agree. I
they're
agree.
wasting our times and our lives. In other words, if you are a scientist and your life is going to be to try to understand certain aspects of the physical world, and so you have to choose what areas you're going to engage. So you're going to engage this area, you're going to explore that, and you're going to try to come to
Yeah.
understand it. And oftentimes you may spend years working on a theoretical approach to a very important thing and discover it's wrong, but you usually learn something along the way. You shift to another approach, maybe another issue altogether, and you conduct science and you have a meaningful life. But what if the government is deliberately screwing with the subject matter? What if it's literally coming in and creating a false understanding of something to serve the government's needs? And so that
Yeah.
you're literally pursuing a scientific track the government already knows is not going to work, but they're happy for you to do it because you're staying out of their way. And
Sure.
so scientists might spend years wasting their life trying to prove something the government already knows to be false. That's, to me, that is a fundamental violation of natural law. In other words, one of the results of this truth embargo is that thousands upon thousands of human hours are wasted and thrown down the drain trying to pursue something the government already knows, or being misdirected, or sent up blind alleys, or whatever. It's criminal in a sense. It won't be called criminal, but whatever. It's all national security. And so there's that, right? And so again,
Hmm.
until people understand the truth embargo, what it is, how it was conducted, and the implications, it's going to be very difficult for them to get into this issue and go, okay, well, what is true and what is not? Please explain it to me. What do you know? No, and that's why one of the reasons the truth embargo is lasted so long. I'm not blaming the people. I'm not blaming the people that come up with wild theories. I'm not blaming the people that have come up with complete hoaxes. Right? I mean, some of it's interesting, some of it's funny, some of it's a little irritating. The point is, the problem is not how citizens are dealing with this truth embargo. It is the truth embargo. The blame goes directly on the United States government and that policy. Period.
Okay. No, I agree with a lot of what you're saying there for sure. You know, so because there is a huge push right now for interdimensional, all these other things besides what you're saying. Literally, I think you're the only person I've heard say this, if I'm being honest. So I don't know. I like Jim Semivan in that same thing that I told you about, the basic UFO story. He's saying the government is not to blame. It's blame the phenomena. That's the reason we don't have disclosure. It's not our government. It's the phenomena.
People get mad at the government and, they say, well, the government should be letting all this information out. Well, shit, blame the phenomenon. That's what I'm doing. I mean, more so than the government. That's the one that's not sharing. And does it have a good reason? Doesn't even deal with reason. Is reasoning even a part of its existence? We don't know. We have no idea. They could be so far advanced that they look at us as microbes, and well, okay, here's a development of a microbe, that we developed years and years ago. Do we give it another level of consciousness? Do we go from having a basic consciousness like an animal to self-consciousness, which we have now? Do we bring it into a form of cosmic consciousness, like William Buck talked about around the turn of the last century? Do we bring them into that, and are we ready? And maybe your experience, my experience, and this whole conversation about that is a preliminary, for that to be happening down the road.
I respectfully disagree. I mean, if that can be proven, I mean, there has been speculation that the ETs are somehow forcing the truth embargo on us, meaning that they have threatened the governments and so forth. That if they don't suppress all of this, that there'll be some terrible consequence. I'm not buying that, and the principal reason I'm not buying it is that if the ETs do not want the governments of the world to confirm their presence to the people, their citizens, they sure as hell have got a funny way of going about it. I mean, in other words, don't be seen, right? Don't go abduct somebody in a way that's somebody up the street can see you hovering over the house. Don't put crop circles down in the UK every year. Don't leave the carcasses of animals behind that you've drained of blood. Take them out and drop them in the Pacific Ocean. I could go on and on. They're not helping at all, and so I'm not buying that. In terms of the explanations, look, for most of the last 77 years, star to star that's been the modality. I mean, pretty much everybody has been on that trail. And it's more recent that these other options have come into play, and so star to star was predominant. Now it has some competition. Now, here is my take on that. Look, we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. We can prove beyond a reasonable doubt they're here. We can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt they come from another star, at least in my mind. Okay, fine, I get that. However, the overall body of knowledge, I think, clearly points to that. And so, okay, fine. Since we haven't proven it, hey, Steve, chill out, man. Inner dimensions. Hey, that's cool. It's great sci-fi. By the way, sci-fi movies and the era of sci-fi is and then fictional movies have educated people to a whole lot of cool stuff, like time travel, like interdimensions, and so forth. And prior to the rise of the sci-fi world in 1950s, don't even think about it. But that's part of the deal. I get it. So, and generally, we have a broader understanding of the world, and these things become possible. Okay, fine. And so, interdimensionals, great. Time travelers, great. They've been living inside the Earth the whole time. Okay.
Yeah.
What is my issue with that? It's not what I call evidential per se. It's an activist problem, and here is what I mean. The activist movement's fundamental goal is to end the truth embargo, and in order to do that, it needs all the support from citizens it can get, and it isn't easy to get that. I think everybody knows that. To the extent that people want to help commit or fund or whatever this effort to end this lie, this organized institutional lie, this truth embargo, it helps. Okay, fine. So here is the problem. if someone wants to, if someone, and they do this, they come forward and say, absolutely, they are interdimensional. I know this for a fact. I dreamed it or whatever the hell. And they put that out there. That is a problem for the activism. Why? Because the likelihood of that being true is low. The likelihood of star to star is very high, but again, not absolutely locked down. But to the extent that the citizens are getting into this interdimensional explanation, this is not helping the activism. Why? Because let me be blunt. Star to star extraterrestrials coming here from another planet, exactly like we do it in our movies and Star Trek and everything else, right? There's been a lot of movies about star to star ETs, including us, right?
Yeah.
And they're there and we're here and there's a good distance between us, but they come and they visit. That can be a little disturbing to some people. But interdimensionals, in other words, they are living in another dimension right next to you all the time. And whenever they want, they can step through into your dimension from that dimension, anywhere, anytime they want. You can be sitting down at Thanksgiving dinner, and suddenly something emerges out of nowhere, grabs all the dark meat, takes it away, and it's gone. All you got is white meat left. And you're sitting there, you would freak out. I mean, what? And so this interdimensional explanation is a far scarier, far more disturbing explanation for their presence. And far scarier explanations is not helping the activist movement. Now let's talk about time travel. We love time travel.
Yeah.
Time travel is made a lot of very lucrative series on TV. Some pretty
I
fine
love the
movies.
future human theory. Like, just as a theory, like, it sounds great. Like, it's cool.
Yeah.
It's fun to talk about.
Well, time travel in general is pretty cool. I mean,
Yeah,
time travel
absolutely,
opens up
for sure.
a vast array of plots. Okay,
Yeah,
so it's got a lot of
100%.
sci-fi, a lot of fictional stuff. So people are into it,
Yeah.
and they like it. And
Yeah.
so naturally, okay, let's say they're time travelers. Okay, fine. But if they're time travelers, they don't need to go star to star. But let's say they can travel through time, but they're from another star. It's still kind of the same thing. But
Sure.
obviously, once time travel got in play, naturally, what came next is they're us from the
Correct.
future. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Apparently not us from the past, but us from the future. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, that is a real problem. In other words, trying to grasp that these ETs are us from the future, that's what we're evolving into, though that doesn't explain the Nordics. Obviously, the Nordics look just like us, but they can time travel too. So apparently some of us we evolved into some very crazy place and turned out like grays and whatever. It's confusing.
The others came out like Olympic athletes. Great.
Exactly.
Right,
It's
yeah.
confusing. It's disturbing, and it's utterly distracting. In my way, it's not helping. It helps the truth embargo. It does not help the truth process. And so the government, they're sitting back there at the Pentagon going, oh yeah, time travel. Absolutely. Go for it. Invest all your money in it. Study it to death, right? Just don't come to us and want to know the nature of that craft that's sitting over at Lockheed Martin for the last 20 years. But let's just focus on time travel, interdimensions, anything that avoids from getting to the fundamental issue. ET's here. ET tech here, we know it, we're studying it, we're sequestering it, and so forth. And so I'm not just throwing those theories out the window. I'm just trying to point out, folks, keep your mind, keep your eye on the prize.
Sure.
All right. And don't because, in other words, do you think the government's going to step forward to resolve that for us and come forward and say, well, look, I understand that you all are, really concerned about interdimensional ETs, and we'd like to explain to you, no, they're not. No, they're not going to do that. Time travelers, oh no, they're not from the, no, here's where no, they're not going to do that. Yeah. They're just sitting there, and some of them are laughing their ass off as they read on social media these theories and so forth, and they're going, oh, you people are so stupid. Because they know there's an arrogance to the truth embargo, a dismissal to the truth embargo. And we've seen it recently in the pushback to the incredible process that's been underway for 7 years that has practically taken us to the door of disclosure. And I'm not thrilled about that either. I hope
Sure.
more people would be aware of that and respond to that. Meaning, arrogance and humor that you evolve because of your special secret place, and how you look down on us as idiots and fools, scratching away at the truth that you already know, that kind of stuff. I wish people would put more attention to that. It might get them angry, might get them motivated.
I mean, this is very interesting what you're saying, if I'm being honest, like, because there's a lot of big name people pushing all of these theories that you're saying, you don't believe in, right? Which I totally get.
You say don't believe. I'm not accepting yet. And it's not a
Correct.
lot,
Correct.
it's some. Okay. It's
Correct.
not a lot, it's some. All right.
Sure.
And I'm
Sure.
not
Sorry.
dismissing it. I'm not
Correct. Correct.
dismissing it.
I'm saying the wrong words here. I apologize. No, you're not. You're not dismissing it. You're saying you lean more towards this other one. Well, a lot of these big names they're not saying. Well, maybe it's that they're saying no. It is interdimensional. It is this. It is that. You got people like Dr. Mike Masters saying they talk to future humans and they're being told what it is, who it is. You got people like Chris Bledsoe, people getting downloads, that telling them what dimensions are coming from, what's happening, getting predictions. The question becomes, as someone from the outside looking in, what do we focus on? I mean, you're bringing up, propaganda, or all these things, all these new whistleblowers that are coming out with Jason Sands. I mean, just some crazy stories that Michael Herrera, all these different people that, what do we do as people? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's just so much. It's like, what the hell is going on? Where do I focus my energy? What do I, maybe it is just the government and, hey, give us the truth here, because there's so much bullshit flying around. I don't know what to grab onto. I don't
Well,
know what to believe,
you're
or not even
describing
believe,
the
but
truth embargo.
invest time in. Yeah, I guess you're right.
No, in other words,
I
the
guess you're
idea of
right.
the truth embargo is to keep people in that state.
Sure. Well,
And,
it's
and of course,
working.
yeah, of
It's
course it is.
working.
Well, it's not going to work much longer. But you get into it and you're going, what, and you say, I can't deal with this, and you go about your life. Great. The government embargo continues. That's why you have activists. This is true of all activist movements.
Sure.
Look, pick a movement. Take civil rights. Okay. The civil rights movement was trying to accomplish something extremely difficult with a very long history. And
Yeah.
so someone comes to that and they're going, I think maybe there's something needs to happen there. We need to do something, but then there's all the propaganda surrounding it, and the lies and the misrepresentation and so forth. And there's things that happen that are both negative and positive, and it's overwhelming. And a lot of people go, "Look, I can't deal with it." But that's where the activist comes in. The activist says, "I can deal with it. I will deal with it." And so, activists come in and they speak truth to power, and they try to get a outcome. It's not easy. There's a
Yeah.
reason that the arc of the universe is long, but does tend toward justice, as opposed to the arc of the universe is short. And that's why activists are important.
Wow.
And yet, because they are always going against the grain, against the state, it's tough. It is a tough path to take. And I ended up doing it and taking it. I have no regrets about it. And
Sure.
it hasn't been as tough for me as many, many, many other activists.
So what do you do with these stories you hear and these witnesses that come out, and Stephen Greer will have this big press club event and all these people come up and tell all these, stories that basically don't match up everywhere. Like, all these stories don't line up. They don't match up. They can't all be real. So do you just ignore these? What's.
I've been asked that question many times. Here's how I deal with it. Imagine I've got 10 boxes in front of me, 10 little boxes, right? And something comes up. And each box has a number assigned to it: 100, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 10. And something comes up. And I assess it as best I can. And I assign a percentage to it, a percentage of its likelihood of being true.
Got it.
And if I see it as 20%, I drop it in the 20% box. If I see it as 80, I put it in the 80% box. And as I move forward, I try to focus and work with the stuff that's in the 80, 90, 100% boxes.
Got it.
Right? And focus there. That does not mean that some of
No, I
these
like that.
ideas, the other boxes may eventually prove out. It just
Sure.
means that if you don't triage this stuff, you will go
Sure.
insane.
Yeah.
Okay.
100%.
Now, let me get back to something else. Look, it may prove when it's all said and done that some are star to star, some are time travelers, some are interdimensional beings,
Fair.
and some have been living in the inner earth all along, but they're just very shy.
Sure.
Okay.
Or
It may prove
underwater.
that all four are true.
Yeah.
All right. And if that is the case, that is the case. But there is a common sense aspect of this that so favors star to star, which includes the fact, and this is again not trivial.
Yeah.
One of the things that the U.S. government really goes to great lengths to just pretend doesn't exist is contact and abduction. I mean, they don't want to go there at all.
Yeah.
We don't try to make them go there. I assure you, there haven't been many people going up on the Hill and actually getting meetings with members of Congress and saying, look, we got to end the truth embargo. Let's start by having a hearing with some contactees that come up and tell you how they created hybrid children against their will, whatever. No, not a chance in hell. Just getting the UFO converted to UAP so they could refer to the subject without suddenly feeling like their career had ended was a chore. And so
Sure.
the abduction thing is totally still backburnered. But let's be clear, it's really a big deal. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of accounts from abductees and contactees about their experience from either direct memory or recalled memory through hypnosis work are in files.
Yeah.
And hundreds of thousands of reports like that is not the same thing as hundreds of thousands of reports, I saw something in the sky.
Sure.
Far more powerful.
Sure.
And if you investigate those reports, not in great detail, but just kind of survey them, what you find is that very frequently the ETs who have invited you into their craft for a annual physical or whatever the hell they're doing, tell them they're from other stars. And then if you start to give legitimate attention to the ancient evidence that Kevin Burns, this absolute genius who created, along with George Tsoukalos, the Ancient Alien series, which I have a lot more respect for than some people.
I love that show.
Ancient evidence, you have, when you look at it, very many of the how would you say scenarios that seem to have substantial basis, the lore and what have you. When you look at it, you learn that the people of that time were being told by these quote gods that they came from other stars. And as I've said on many podcasts, if somebody tells you where they're from, believe them. But that's circumstantial. But again, you just can't dismiss it.
Sure.
Right? I am not aware of a single alien abduction account or contactee account. I mean, I'm physical now. I'm not talking about the psychic stuff. I mean, things get really strange there. Where they have specifically told the contactee they're from the future. If there may have been some, but if there are, they are a very small number compared to the ones that are being told they're from star to star. And then there's the common sense aspect of this. Look, the relativistic physics that is the underpinning of the opposition to star travel is only 110 years old, 112 years old. That's it. 100 years. Right? Einstein, God bless him, comes up, purely using thought experiments, which shows how powerful the human brain is, and comes up with some ideas that he's able to then work out ahead of any hard experiments, and utterly creates a theory that we now accept as the relativistic theory of time and space, and is proven later on by experiments. Okay, fine. The idea that that is it, that's the sum and bonum of our understanding of, is just human arrogance, typical human arrogance, and it's elitist, right? The idea that 500 years from now, that'll still be the only understanding we have of time and space is absurd. Common sense says there is no chance that what we know about it is limited to Einstein's wonderful intuition and some subsequent confirmations of the fundamental theory, meaning that within the context of how we can experiment, we can show that those things are true. That doesn't mean that we have now eliminated all other possible interpretations of time and space. And of course, the average person simply doesn't. Well, science is being studied less and less, mathematics less and less. We're becoming a math, science, illiterate culture in the collective, whatever. But I get it. It's okay, right? But the truth is that no, that's not the way it works. And so this whole relativistic barrier to star travel just doesn't impress me at all. Now, you may say, well, Steve, what about the barrier to time travel? What about the barrier or the issue of interdimensionality? Well, without getting into the grandfather paradox on time travel, let's talk about interdimensionality. Interdimensionality was really not a factor or a player in this. It starts to emerge a number of years ago, not that many, with the emergence of string theory.
Yeah.
As they're trying to find the grand unified theory.
Yeah.
And string theory becomes a candidate. Has it been established? Is it? No. There's still a lot of competing theories, and we still do not yet know the fundamentals. Though there's been some interesting advancements in quantum physics. But is string theory? No. But it was attractive because it did seem to explain and be able to account for all of the known particles based upon vibrating strings. Obviously, really small vibrating strings. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. And people were, it was good. It was great. People were like, hey, that's very cool. That's very cool. And it's a scientific inquiry. But there was a catch. Because in order to do the math, to make it work, so that these vibrating strings would account for all the particles, the math indicated mathematically that there had to be other dimensions. And there was various numbers. 11 kept popping up. And naturally, those that were pursuing that explanation were going, well, where are these things? Where are these other, 11 dimensions? And I think the consensus in terms of that interpretation was the other dimensions were curled up, right, and simply not in play. Sure. Okay, great. And so off we go. And so the idea of interdimensionality became a thing, and it was embraced by the sci-fi writers and the public, and it's really cool.
Oh, yeah.
So we put it in play. And so now interdimensionality, absolutely. It's everywhere, clearly obvious. And then there is this idea of portals, which is interesting. Yeah. And there's the fact that humans, contactees report ETs walking through their bedroom walls. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And so it's not totally unreasonable to conclude that if you're able to walk through a wall or come through a portal, it must be a dimensional issue. You're coming from another dimension.
Sure.
Or they have some physics that allows them to do these things and get around that appears to be interdimensional, but in fact, it's simply physics we don't understand that we're interpreting as interdimensional activity. And that's standard. I mean, as we go forward in time, scientific breakthroughs, people go, oh my God, that means that, because they don't understand it. And later on, they realize, oh, now I understand why that is happening. And again, in other words, a lot of science is essentially magic until you finally figure it out. And so I understand why interdimensionality is in play. I don't disrespect it. But from the standpoint of ending the truth embargo, it has been a little bit of a negative. It's not going to stop it, right? But once again, the U.S. government knows where they're from. Yeah. You can bank on it. They know if they're star to star. They know if they're interdimensional. They know if they're time travelers. But they're just not going to come forward and say, guys, I don't want you to waste your time, right? But the fact is, you're right. They're not going to do that. They will let us speculate on this until the day we die, and that is the fundamental problem and the reason why ending the truth embargo. One of many reasons why it's absolutely going to happen.
No, you make some great points. It's honestly, it's really interesting to hear you talk about all this, to be honest.
I hope so. Otherwise, why would anybody listen to me?
Yeah, right. I ask myself that all the time about myself. Look, the UAP Disclosure Act is sort of back in the news again, right? And one part of this proposed amendment, right, to the NDAA is one aspect to it is this term that's floating around, eminent domain, right? And I recently had Brandon Fugel on, right, from Skinwalker Ranch, and I know Danny Sheehan has mentioned certain things about Travis Taylor, Jay Stroud. I'm not here to get into all that, but Brandon made some comments about eminent domain and how it potentially would affect him, right? And what he's trying to do at Skinwalker Ranch. And I got to be honest, he made some good points, but just like I told Brandon, Danny made some good points the other way, right? For having it on this and trying to get it. So I'm curious where you stand on this aspect to it, the eminent domain.
What we are trying to present to the public transparently could be undermined or could be completely hijacked by some sweeping, ignorant, eminent domain legislation that hasn't been properly thought through, that hasn't been properly vetted. I do have a concern with that. I also think that it's a bit laughable that everyone thinks that congressional hearings and FOIA requests and any number of calls for disclosure are going to result in any such disclosure.
I view their position as rather silly, actually. That like they don't seem to be aware of the fact that the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution, at the very origins of our entire government, have explicitly granted authority for eminent domain to the United States government.
I know you've got a very sophisticated audience. I want to incorporate that, though, into a quick summary of where the hell things are right now.
Sure.
And they're in a very interesting place. Essentially, and I'm really going to compress this, we are at the doors of disclosure. We're right there. We're standing in front of the door. But the door is shut, and we can't open it. And very quickly, 2017, things start happening that ultimately leads to the first legislation on this issue ever in 2020, signed by the president in December, President Trump. A second piece of legislation comes out in 2021, signed by President Biden. A third piece of legislation comes out in 22, signed by President Biden. And then the fourth piece of legislation comes out in 2023. And so as these 4 years are going by, the issue is advancing extremely fast. Lots is happening. All I can say is I do my best to keep up with it. But if you want to just read the record, in a sense, if I could slam together a book, and I assure you that's not likely to happen because I've got ADD, man, big time. But if I could write a book, it would pretty much explain all of this in great detail. But a huge amount is happening that has taken us right to the door of disclosure. And the four pieces of legislation were absolutely essential. The creation of AARO was essential. The briefing of Congress was essential. And ultimately, members of Congress started getting involved, speaking openly. And then witness protection was being put into some of this legislation, which meant more witnesses are coming forward, ultimately leading to, in a complicated way, the coming forward of David Grush, which was a very powerful event, which opened up more things, and things are just advancing very quickly until it reached a point where, even though disclosure is inevitable, there were those opposed to it within the United States government and the defense contractors had to push back. They sort of, I think they know that it is inevitable, but I think they would prefer that when it ends, they're not around. In other words, they don't want to have to be answering those questions. And so that's one reason why,
Sure.
as it really started to get real for them, they decided to push back. But there was another reason. And that reason was a brilliant chess move on the part of Senator Chuck Schumer, who was the defense. He's the Senate Majority Leader, very important person.
Correct.
He, though not a member of the Senate Intel Committee, deliberately stepped into this issue in July of 2023.
Yeah.
And he did it because he had no choice. The emergence of David Grush created huge problems for not only the Pentagon, but also for the politicians that are trying to move this issue forward in an appropriate way in order to set up disclosure. And a lot of people are going, what are you saying, Steve? Arrow is about disclosure. The legislation is about disclosure. Isn't it about the government finally trying to find out about this? No, it has nothing to do with that. The government's known about the ET presence for decades. All of this stuff you've been seeing, while it's cast in that way, meaning, oh, there's a potential national security reason. We need to look into this. Or there could be an interference with our airliners or flights. We need to, no. They're having to do all this because they know this announcement is going to have to take place. This disclosure event is going to happen, and they need to be set up for it so that it will go well, even though it will not be easy or comfortable. And they will have to answer brutal questions. Still, they need legislation. They need the members of Congress to be involved. They need hearings. They need all of this stuff so that the day after disclosure will go as well as it possibly can. Okay, fine. But eventually the pushback came. Schumer reacted to Grush coming forward. He couldn't just let that hang out there, meaning Grush has made a powerful case, not only in an interview with Ross Coulthart, but under oath to the Oversight Subcommittee, that there's non-human tech and non-human bodies, and he has had firsthand testimony from those involved. And so what? That's just going to hang there? Well, eventually, that's going to become a real problem. Questions are going to start coming here, there, whatever, maybe even at the president. What do you do? I mean, what do you do about David Grush? Well, you attack him. Kirkpatrick did. You release his medical files to try to, destroy him there. They did that.
Yeah.
You push back in the social media. They did that. But he survived all that, right? He's an American hero. He survived it. And so it's hanging. You don't want, the president doesn't want to get into this. The DOD doesn't know what to do. And Chuck Schumer said, I know what to do. And so what he did is he got together with Mike Rounds and they said, look, we've got to respond to this in a way that the public will get. And so he and Rounds put together the fourth legislation. And this was the total package, meaning everything else that was really needed legislatively to begin the process of revealing all of this after disclosure. It wasn't going to be, okay, let's start bringing the stuff out, and eventually so much will come out, the president will have to, no, not at all. It was, let's get this ready. So when the president, almost certainly after hearings, which is what happens, right? Nixon didn't resign. Nixon resigned because of the hearings that had to happen before he made that decision. And there's other things like that. And so he says, this is it. And he puts forward the ultimate bill, the UAP Disclosure Act, which includes the UAP Controlled Disclosure Plan. I mean, how much more obvious can it be? And he talks about how it'll come forward, the powers and the powers that will help to make that happen, the Presidential Review Panel, the UAP Review Panel, all of this stuff was the total package. And he announces it on July the 14th. He puts it up on their website as the legislation from the Senate on July 27 for all the world to see.
Yeah.
And he refers to non-human tech and non-human bodies. And so what has he done? One, he has provided a proper response to what David Grush has just put into play. In other words, the world is seeing that one of the most powerful men in our Congress is now responding legislatively to that information and everything else that's taken place. And therefore, that's good. That's good. We're looking forward to that law being enacted. We're looking forward to whatever needs to happen so that that process of revelation and coming forward with the information will take place. And we'll learn about the ET tech and the ET bodies. Good. Very good. And so that kind of settled it down, right? Put the focus on it. Also, it also backed up Grush, right? Which took some pressure off him, but he still keeps getting death threats. So is Elizondo. So whatever. So good, fine. But he did something else. And I one day, boy, it would be an honor to sit down with the senator and just say, Senator, could you give me the thinking and theory and strategy behind the decision to get with Mike and put this together? But until he tells us that, I got to speculate. So he's putting out the bill. He knows there could be pushback. He knows that this is taking it to a place that the opposition to the truth and ending the truth embargo, disclosure, may react.
Sure.
And so what could happen? They could gut the bill, refuse to pass it, whatever, right? It's going to be in the NDAA, so they got to decide about it. It's not something they can just dismiss on the side. It's got to be decided about. That's always been part of this, and non-trivial. The idea that this legislation is not independently put out there, not standalone, but stuck in one of the most important bills in the United States, the National Defense Authorization Act, should tell people something about how important and serious it is. All right, so he puts that out there. And in addition to the UAP panel, right, review board, in addition to the high classification status provided to the review board and certain members of Congress, right, in addition to these powers, he adds eminent domain. And there's two things about that are important. All right. One, by adding eminent domain specifically targeting non-human technology and bodies, he goes another step further to back up Grush. He absolutely locks down Grush's testimony and says to the world, it is absolutely true. Stop pissing on Grush, okay? Because there's no way that he puts eminent domain for non-human tech and a legislation for the National Defense Authorization Act if there is no non-human tech, okay? Or that he thinks there might be non-human tech. Absolutely not. He would be making a complete fool of himself. And so by putting that in there, he has locked it down. But he's also done something else. To the extent that those opposed to disclosure, and particularly the defense contractors that have in their possession that non-human tech, he has laid down the mantle. He has thrown down the glove and said, we're really going to do this. And I am stating that the U.S. government has eminent domain over that tech. And there is a very good reason to justify that without question, but there is a reason to push back against it. I get it, right? And so essentially it guaranteed a pushback, even if it was a possibility that they might not push back, they were going to. But more importantly, he knew there was going to be pushback. He threw that out there because two things strategically. One, if they push back against eminent domain, he's basically had gotten the defense contractors to confirm the non-human tech. Because if they're raising a stink about eminent domain, which they did, why would they do that if there's no non-human tech? I mean, just don't do it. And so he forced them to literally confirm it. Plus, he put in something very, very significant that could be used as a bargaining chip. So if it came down to the negotiations, the hardcore negotiations in the reconciliation conference about the language, they could trade it off. They could say, okay, I'll tell you what, we will strip eminent domain out.
Got it.
But we keep the review board, we keep the subpoena power, we keep the classification status. Okay.
That makes sense.
And that's legitimate.
Sure.
But the response was total. They decided we got to get rid of this whole thing. And they came out from underneath their rocks. They had to go basically public indirectly. Everybody eventually saw what was happening. and they literally gutted the bill. They didn't eliminate it completely because I think they realized that was a bridge too far to cross, and so they gutted all the powers and left the basic bill, okay, which caused a huge stink, and then that was ultimately passed. All right.
Yeah.
And they felt, well, we've bought some time, right?
Yeah.
And we've raised the eminent domain counter, thinking and what have you. And they took a breath and they stepped back, and then all of a sudden they discovered, wait a minute, we've been had. And the analogy I like to use is that this is a high level, world champion chess game. And Schumer made a move, they made a counter move, and realized that they had been put into mate in 3. And they're going, holy crap, we've lost the game. But they weren't going to turn their king over right away. And what do I mean by this? I mean this. After they successfully gutted the bill, Schumer did not waste any time to go into the Senate and read into the record in front of a camera with an empty Senate chamber that, no, we're sorry about this, and we're kind of irritated with the Republicans about this, but we're not done. We're going to continue to pursue this, which they instantly knew meant that they could bring a standalone bill up anytime they wanted to and make them go through the whole damn thing again, but as a standalone bill, which would have been much more difficult to deal with in the Senate. I mean, the House could simply refuse to deal with it, but at a point the Senate would deal with it, put it out there, and the whole thing would have to start over. And they're going, oh, we can't do that again. And then while they're thinking about that, they reminded themselves, I think most cases, even the defense contractors knew this, of all the scores of witnesses that have come forward during these last 4 years wanting to testify, high-level people, some firsthand. And they realized, wait a minute, this bill doesn't affect that at all. I mean, we've gutted the bill, but that doesn't mean that Mark Warner can't hold the hearing that he's been wanting to hold for some time and bring dozens of these witnesses forward, blow the whole thing sky high.
Yeah.
And he could do it anytime he wanted to. And they're going, oh my God, what are we going to do now? All right. And that's when they really got desperate and really went too far and disgraced themselves. They said, okay, we got to take this another step further. And so they said, look, we got to put together a new Condon report, right? We got to get somebody to sign off on it. We got to get it out there, basically saying there's nothing to this. I shut this down like they did in '69 with the Condon report, right? And close down Blue Book, all that kind of stuff. We got to do one of those. And so they persuaded Sean Kirkpatrick to sign off on a completely bogus report because he was upset and angry and on his way out the door, in which they basically tried to dismiss it all and shut it down. And it blew up in their face instantly. There was no chance that this was going to work like 1969. No way. But they put this out in an act of desperation. All right. And so that kind of slowed things down. The press stepped back a little bit. All right. And then we move forward. And this is what happened 2 or 3 days ago, 3 or 4 days ago. I'm going to share it with your audience right now, and I'm going to read from it. Okay. This article comes out. Here is what has happened. Their greatest fear, the defense contractors' greatest fear, has exactly happened. Schumer and Rounds did exactly what they said they were going to do, and they did it a couple of days ago. Okay, let's read. 2 influential U.S. senators, Mike Rounds and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, have revived their Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena UAP Act. Well, it's actually called the UAP Disclosure Act, which would directly involve the next president in a process that could reveal Earth is being engaged by advanced non-human intelligence. This process could reveal that the U.S. government and defense contractors possess these entitled entities' craft, which are, according to the act, capable of trans-medium travel, instantaneous acceleration, etc. Both senators, Schumer and the Democratic Party, from the Democratic Party and Rounds from the Republican Party, resurrected the bipartisan Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Disclosure Act. Okay, they got it right. Following its gutting from last year's national defense. If the act is passed, the president would appoint a 9-person impartial citizens. Would appoint 9 impartial citizens with Senate consent to a newly established UAP Records Review Board. All right. The establishment of the review board would prevent government agencies and individuals accused of involvement with illegal UAP programs. That's a very interesting statement. I'm not sure that Christopher is right there. from investigating and exonerating themselves. I'm not sure that that is what Schumer has been saying, but it's interesting to note that. The board would eliminate their direct influence over the government's current UAP office and the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, a practice multiple sources have reported to Libertarian Times. Okay? Now, the reintroduction of the act intended to be included within NDAA for fiscal year 2025 could be considered a major rebuke to ARROW. Absolutely. Just not long after recently, but not too long ago, I forget, it's been about a month, out of nowhere, Robert Garcia, a Democrat in the House, put a standalone bill into play in which it tried to bring the UAP review board. All right. And of course, Mike Johnson was not going to let that go anywhere. And so it was killed immediately. But what Garcia was doing was sending a message to the Department of Defense and the defense contractors. We're not buying the ARROW reports. Nonsense. Okay. A little message was sent there. Okay. So that happened. And now, of course, just a few days ago, now the big response to ARROW takes place. The reintroduction of the act intended to be included within the NDAA could be considered a major rebuke to ARROW, which concluded in February that they had found no empirical evidence, a disgrace for a lot of people and the DOD. Liberation Times understands that whistleblowers, he should be saying witnesses, with firsthand knowledge of concealed retrieval and reverse engineering programs involving advanced non-human intelligence have chosen to engage with Senator Rounds and Schumer, as well as President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, confirming again that not only just witnesses are prepared to testify before the Senate Intel Committee, but firsthand witnesses are prepared to testify, such as the ones that gave Grush the information that sent him to the Intel Committee some time ago and ultimately to the Inspector General's office. It is further understood that Sullivan was consulted for both last year's and this year's version of the UAPDA, although ultimately last year Liberation Times sources say that Sullivan failed to provide the White House backing when the UAP faced opposition. That is not surprising because ultimately the White House and the president have to stay out of this disclosure process. They cannot get directly involved because that politicizes it in one of the most hyper-partisan eras of American history. The whole issue needs to be brought to the White House by legislation, by hearings, and delivered to the White House in a transparent public way, with the public watching the process and watching the hearings so the president and the White House can engage it as a response, not as a force majeure. Okay? Sure. And so this happens a couple of days ago. All right.
We got a few minutes left, Steve. So okay. I just want to make sure you get out your final thoughts here on this.
Let me close with this. And I'm happy to come back and give you a very different interview.
Sure.
From a very different personal perspective.
Okay.
Right after that bill is submitted, which would have taken everything to the next level, maybe set the stage for the Senate Intel Committee hearing that Warner has said he wants, but he wants firsthand witnesses, and the firsthand witnesses are reluctant to come forward because they don't feel there's enough witness protection. A little, thing that has to be resolved. A 20-year-old kid tries to kill a former president. And this thing barely gets any, and it's not going to get any press. Of course it's not going to get any press. And so it just happens, and then boom, this assassination attempt takes place. And history has changed. History is changed on multiple levels. The future becomes extremely uncertain and scary. And the disclosure process is dead in the water for now. But there are even bigger concerns. Well, domestically, there are even bigger concerns. And now we are in a very, very dangerous place. And I am deeply troubled and extremely upset. I couldn't sleep last night. I am a political activist on this issue, but I pay attention to politics, and I have for a very long time. I am viewing what is happening now through a relatively educated perspective, and I am extremely concerned. And I will leave your audience with that. and perhaps we can come back for another interview, and I can go further into this, and I might go into it from a more personal perspective, which I generally don't do.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. Absolutely, man. There's so much to talk about in this. So, absolutely, would love to have you back on for round two for sure. I tell you what, probably our viewers will have some questions for you. So the next time I bring you back, I can ask you some of those
Sure.
questions sort of mixed in. That'd be cool. Yeah, absolutely. No, I've really enjoyed listening to you and hearing your take. I have to admit, you have a lot of unique takes about this, and I would even say fresh takes, even from what I've seen. You may not think they're fresh, but they are. They're refreshing too. Some of them as well. So again, I like your approach to this, and I like hearing your thoughts and your opinions about everything. So yeah, this was a great conversation, man. I really appreciate you coming on and just taking the time to talk to us. So
It's my
definitely want to have
pleasure.
you back for round two.
It's my pleasure, and I do have a perspective, which as far as I can tell, is simply not being represented by any of the commentators that are getting on the larger media. Nobody is
I agree.
going there. I
agree.
want the opportunity, but I'm not able to penetrate CNN or the usual networks. I'm unable to penetrate some of the major shows, interview shows, and that's on me. But I wish some of the fundamental issues that I brought up to you, particularly the fact that the government already knows about this and what's going on now is to prepare for disclosure.
Sure.
I wish I could get that to a larger audience because it would help to put aside some of the confusion and cognizant dissonance that this whole thing is creating, because it is very difficult to follow. In other words, if they already know, why don't they just tell us? Why are they creating this ruse? Why are they having to misrepresent and so forth? And I think that if the perspective I have kind of resolves that, and
Sure.
people could understand they're doing it because they have no other choice, but it's ultimately leading to the truth. So hang in, but we'll see.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Look, I like leaving it that there's more for round two, right?
Yes, sir.
That means there's more juice in this lime to squeeze out, as we say,
Oh, there's
in the
plenty of juice in
kitchen.
the lime.
Plus,
It's a
plenty of
very deep
juice
lime.
in the lime. I
Yeah.
love it. Awesome, Steve. Well, thanks
All
again,
right,
man.
man. Take care.